Hey, welcome everyone to Deep Dreams Podcast. It's another exciting episode. Today, my guest is Dr. Jennifer Bird, a Bible scholar with a PhD in New Testament and early Christianity. Her favorite subjects are gender, sexuality, and marriage. And her latest book, Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say, is available for pre-order now. Welcome, Dr. Jennifer Bird.
Thank you, David. Hey, thanks for having me on again. It's so fun to talk with you.
Well, thank you. This is a very exciting episode for me. I love your work. Permission granted to dive into the subject of marriage in the Bible. But my first question is, I don't know if we've ever fully talked about this, but why do you think you are so interested in gender, sexuality, and marriage? Like, why is that something that you've just found yourself? I mean, we all know that, Josh has found himself in the slavery. Dr. Josh has found himself in the slavery niche, and he probably is very sick of that. You don't seem like you don't seem like you're sick of. You don't seem like you're sick of the gender, sexuality, marriage niche. What is it about it?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you noticed, I am a female, so there's that on the gender. Right, when you grow up as an intelligent female, it can be quite an issue for you. Just say that in general, people. Yeah. It's been especially growing up in the South, yada, yada. So yeah, I think gender has always been the empowerment of people who have been sidelined because of the way they appear. That has kind of always been a thing for me. And so, yeah, and I think I can, that's a really interesting question, the way you phrased it for some reason. So I'm trying to think of what's an interesting way to respond to that, because there are a lot of things I could say. I ended up going to seminary because of my own particular hangups, you could say, around what women are allowed to do in Christian contexts. And I was an evangelical, technically an evangelist, you could say, for 6 or 7 years. Very much cared about what I thought the Bible said, and it needed to be adhered to, right? Even to my own detriment at times. And so that's what, having women in my life who were really important, who were ordained, and I didn't know what to do with that, right? That got me to seminary, and being in seminary and studying these texts for myself and studying the languages, that's what led me to PhD work, because I was like, there are so many things I misunderstood. I meant well, right? And people who taught me to think about it that way, I know they meant well, but it was underinformed. And so, so as an educator at heart, right, that's why I went on for PhD, was hoping I might be taken a little bit more seriously. And I kind of backed into the whole marriage thing. It wasn't intentional. But, when you start seeing, well, I should say, for me, coming from a kind of middle of the road upbringing, but having my own personal, very conservative swing for a while. So I saw everything to do with the body, and in particular sex, through a very conservative lens. And so when I started thinking about it differently and seeing it more as just a normal part of human experience, right? And not something to be shamed, not something, we can talk honestly about it, and that actually helps. And it's complicated, and it's not always easy, or, like the whole range of things, right? I started studying and thinking about things differently in graduate school, and wanted to be able to help others to get beyond perhaps a fairly limited conservative perspective. But then the other piece of marriage, really, that came for me when I was in North Carolina in 2012. The North Carolina had a state constitutional amendment up for a vote that was going to indirectly define marriage within the Constitution as between a man and a woman. And that was just, it was just too much for me. I went to some sessions to hear people talking about it, and I was like, there's just a lot of educating that needs to happen around this, because people were in public spaces and I'd hear things come out of their mouth about what God intends, and I'm like, what?
Yeah. Part of my deconstruction was actually happening around the time the same-sex marriage plebiscite was being voted on in Australia. And I remember specifically seeing someone take a photo at an airport of a sign that said love is love or something, or and they're like, oh, does this have to be thrown down our faces they said they posted on Facebook. Does this have to be thrown in our faces everywhere we go? And it's just like, I don't think you understand like that. This isn't persecution against you. This is like, this is society taking the big stick that, religious folks been whacking
exactly
LGBT folks with for a while,
For a while.
That's wow.
Yeah. So that was kind of I backed into it. I ended up actually sharing, I don't know how much of this question, how long an answer you wanted to your question, David, but
go as long as you like.
The day, thank you. The day after the vote, I actually made a post on Facebook about like, and a friend who had an in with Huffington Post, which was a little bit more interesting at the time, said, hey, I've got I know the person who heads up the religion column. Why don't you write a piece, And I was, it kind of went semi-viral there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because it was a thing, right? I mean, that was in the teens. There was a lot more kind of foment around this, and it was exciting for sure. But it was about, how this amendment distorts what's actually in the Bible. And so that angle was like, oh, there's so much to say here. There's so much to do in terms of public education. And so, because even lawmakers are alluding to it or talking about it kind of skewed, like, what God thinks or says, and it's like, well, let's talk about that then. If you think that the Bible says X, Y, and Z, let's look at what it actually says. So I spent the next 10 years trying to figure out how to help people break it down into bite-sized pieces. And it led me to creating a video series actually to help people walk through like one topic at a time, like watch a video and then talk about it together. And then that led to the book. So like the video series, it's like number 1 in the series is the same thing as chapter 1. And so it, not intentionally, but it just was like, oh, there's I have 15 minutes of a video hitting the highlights, and then I have a chapter over here that's like going a little deeper for you. And it's meant to be for a broad audience, but I don't know if I hit a broad audience or not. I don't know what you think about that.
I think to me, it was the perfect level of like, it wasn't too academic for me personally, and it wasn't too like, Jesus lived in, like
good.
Jesus was a man who lived in, like, it was somewhere it was perfect. It was a perfect amount, and I really did enjoy it. And so your book, I've linked it in the chat, and you have a promo code for it, don't you? So
do. Thank you. It's Roman and Littlefield, family and friends. So FANDF 30. And it only works on the publisher website. Thank you. That is the site. You can get it elsewhere, but that discount code only applies here.
Awesome. So if you use that code, you'll get a discount and you'll be able to purchase the book. It's available for pre-order right now. They'll be coming. They'll be sent out quite soon. Is that right? Well, we're thinking so, right?
Right. It's in print. I'm told that there are copies on a shelf somewhere.
Okay,
in a warehouse or something. Yeah. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed is you say that, because you're a woman, you experience certain things. One thing I've noticed, just it seems to happen everywhere, but women seem to get a lot of we're 8 minutes in, I can swear. Women get a lot of shit online, like so much. Like someone was talking to Shannon Q about something. And so, an experiment that I'd been running for like the longest time Deep Drinks has been happening is I wore the same thing for every single episode, for 90-something episodes of Deep Drinks. Partly because, one, I thought it looked good. So I was like, oh, this looks good. I'll wear this. And I would take off I had like a top that I'd wear of that, and I'd throw it on in the closet, and I'd wear it all the time. So I'd wear it for half an hour or 2-hour blocks every time I do Deep Drinks. And no one commented. No one ever cared that I was wearing the same thing. No one ever talked about it. And I was just like, I wonder how long it's going to take for someone to mention the fact that I'm wearing the same thing in every single episode. Awesome. There's no way a lady could happen. You know what I mean? Like it'd be the talk of the town. Like it's just ridiculous.
Doesn't she have any more clothes?
Yeah, I know. It's just these weird like social paradigms that we fall into. It's bizarre.
That's right. I love that you did that though. That's really kind of
Well, I've stopped now. I'm just like, I'm gonna wear whatever I want. Yeah. But So I forgot to even ask what we're drinking today. So you don't drink the hard sauce. You don't drink alcohol. You don't drink milkshakes.
I did drink alcohol for quite a bit of my life, and I have stopped. So yeah, I'm drinking tea tonight. Actually, this is a dandelion detox tea or something. I don't know. I like the taste of it, and somehow it makes me feel good about drinking it. I don't know. It's not very interesting. What about you?
I got a weird, it's one of those, it's a fancy, I got it from a float tank place. You know those places you go and float?
Yes.
I got given a gift card to one of them, and I went and floated for a while, and then at the end you can have tea, and I was like, this tea's great, so I bought some. It's I don't know how to describe it. It's a very herbally kind of flavor.
I was gonna say, I bet it feels like it's got a lot in it because they want to help you get stuff out, right?
Yeah, it's like licorice in there and some other stuff. Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty good. I like it.
I really want to ask you about your float tank experience, but this probably isn't the time or place. But how was it?
It was good. It was okay. I'll tell you. And because of my gender and sexuality, there have been 3 times now because I liked it, so I went back. The first time I was with my wife, and we floated together, and that wasn't good because you're either bumping into each other too much, or I couldn't help but get in the mood. So I'm sitting there just thinking of my naked wife, and and trying to calm down.
Trying not to think about you.
Yeah, and I'm like, this is
and so really fun, honey.
I felt like it felt for me. It felt like it was like I was at a strip club and I wanted to go meditate. It was like the wrong. Right. So it was just that hit me wrong. That's and then the second time I did it, I was lying there, and that was good. But then someone told me you need to do the sauna first. So then the third time I went and did the sauna first, and the sauna, I turned the temperature up to 75 degrees, and my heart went I was I almost threw up.
Yeah,
I was it was not good. So I actually walked out there needing water, and I just felt like I'd run a marathon. So by the time I got into the float tank, so I feel like the 4th time I do it, I'll get it. I'll get it right. Yeah, but it was okay. Yeah,
because that's 75 Celsius, and I'm doing the math in my head. I'm like, that's
it didn't get up that hot.
Degrees
it didn't get
Fahrenheit,
that.
Right? Yeah,
it didn't get that hot, but it was rising and rising.
Hot, yeah,
and my heart rate was and I was like, that's not good. Is that supposed to happen?
Right. I'm supposed to go to cardiac arrest.
Yeah. Have you done a float tank before?
No, I haven't, but I've had lots of people tell me that they're wonderful, great, all this kind of great stuff. I'm like, yep. Mm-hmm.
I've heard if you like baths, they're good. So
okay, I do.
Yeah. I kind of get bored in baths. I want my phone or something so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it depends. Anyway, let's jump into your book. Marriage.
Yes.
Marriage in the Bible.
Well.
So I guess the question, and what I titled the stream is were Adam and Eve even married? How do we, the idea, where did marriage kind of come from? Where did it develop? I have this idea that I didn't think that Adam and Eve, I guess, had wedding rings or wedding bands or anything like that, or they did a ceremony and but I wonder were they married in the eyes of God? Was Abraham married? What did marriage look like in the Hebrew Bible?
Yeah, I really wish I knew the answer to that question. You know what I mean? Because we don't have any records of a ceremony, but there may have been one, right? Mm-hmm. The closest we come to having any sort of acknowledgement is when you see the story about Jacob, right? And how Laban, slips the wrong daughter into his bed. But all we know is Laban calls his family together. They have a big party. And then Jacob goes off to have sex with the woman that he has just been given, right? And lo and behold, it's the wrong daughter, right? So it's the whole thing. I just want to comment on that, but I'm going to keep moving. Right? Really, you didn't notice until the morning. Having a hard time with that one.
Not my fault.
Right. Right. So there's no mention of a ceremony. Now, I'm sure the women did, I'm sure people did things, but there's no ceremony talked about or narrated. And I think it's great. I've had a lot of people push back, just because we don't have it recorded doesn't mean there wasn't one. That's a good point. That's an important point. But even more interesting from my perspective is, but it wasn't included. It was never a part of the story they were telling. Even in the Newer Testament, when you look at Jesus going to a wedding. Like, we're just jumping straight to the festivity, like the celebration afterwards. That's all we ever hear about is the celebration afterwards. So, when Abraham, as Abram, took a woman, right? He purchased Sarah. Like, that's what they did. That's what men would do. They would purchase a woman, and she was his. And what we see happening over and over in the Hebrew Bible narratives or the laws or whatever that gives us a sense of what's going on is a man purchases a woman and then he has sex with her to mark her as his territory. And that's that. Like, that's it, right? Having sex is what denotes their togetherness, right? Or, it's kind of a backwards thing. You can't actually have sex before marriage in this case, because having sex is what makes you married.
Yeah.
When it's the right woman. So like men get to have sex with all these other women, but if they don't want it to count, it doesn't. It's very convenient that way.
Yeah.
Are you tracking? Like, was that?
Yeah.
So yeah, there isn't. It's not a thing.
You kind of say, the quote you say, if the way I'm describing things brings to mind an image of a dog lifting a leg next to a tree in order to mark their territory, then I have made my point. I love the way you've said that.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember the first time I said that actually in front of a group of people, and it was my hometown church, like the people that helped rear me as a child, and my eye doctor sitting right there, and he went red in the face when I said that. And I was like, yeah, I'm sorry, Dave, but that's what we're talking about. And he's like, but I don't think about it that way. I was like, that's my point, right?
Yeah.
The biblical texts are not talking about it in the way that we think about it. Yeah.
No. So something that blew me away very early in your book was this kind of what do you call it? Is it graph? What's the word?
Table.
A chart? Table. That's the table. Table 2.0. Okay. Oh my gosh. So I'm going to share it, and this is something super, super interesting. So take versus marry. So first of all, actually, can you talk a little bit about, before I show it, can you talk a little bit about when we read the word marry in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament, what is that a mistake, or what is that?
Yeah.
Is that the correct translation?
Yeah. So there's probably 85-90% of the time when you see, and I'm just going to refer to English, but I imagine something similar happens in other language translations, just because a lot of people have this hang up, but I can only address English at this point. When you see in the English marry, most of the time, the Hebrew there is a verb lakach, which is to take. And there are a couple other verbs also that are in the mix, but they're all a form of let's just stick with lakach since it's the primary one. How about that for now? Yeah. And so instead of seeing, you shall not marry the women from among the Canaanites, it should say you shall not take. There is no verb that is specifically what we think of as marriage. So the same take in relation to taking a woman is also used when God says, Abraham, take your son and go sacrifice him. There isn't, we're talking about taking. And, early on, I had someone say, well, what's wrong with take? Because at least in the wedding ceremonies I've been to, the person leading it will say, so-and-so, Sally, do you take Joe? Joe, do you take Sally? But that would be of two equals who are being asked the same thing. And it's a different kind of situation. In the Hebrew Bible, essentially, this is what I think helps. I think we should remove the reference to marrying, and I think we should just call it taking and just see how that affects you. Because when you take a passage and you take out the references to marry or marrying, and it even applies to the labels husband and wife. If you take out marry and just replace it with take and see how it makes you feel, right? That I think should be done through the entire Hebrew Bible. No references to marry. They didn't have a separate verb yet to talk about two people coming together who are mutually deciding upon it as equals. They just didn't have a way to refer to that. It was much more pragmatic or practical. A man, it was time for man to leave his parents and start his own thing. So he's going to go take a woman, throw her over his shoulder and take her home, like, let's start our own family, baby, whatever. So the take versus marry. So, so I have two different tables, one to show that take is also translated as take at times, and it's a pretty clear, we're talking about objects here. But take versus marry, I appreciate you putting this up. I think when I first realized this, and then I started thinking about how much content is affected by this translation choice, which is what it is, right? The people in the translation committees are uncomfortable with this kind of raw language of men taking women, and so they change it to men marrying them.
Yeah. So is this the same? So when I'll bring it up again,
Okay.
but is this the same when it says take the virgin girls for yourself in Numbers 31, I think it is?
Yes.
That's a very like brutal type of take. Obviously, in all these instances, these aren't necessarily the same as that, or are they? Or are they? when you say,
why would they not be?
Well, so I'm watching Game of Thrones. Okay. Sometimes
do tell.
It's so funny. I had someone say, I want to watch a fantasy series. It was a Christian friend. I want to watch a fantasy series, but not Game of Thrones. It's pure evil. And I'm thinking, like, everything in Game of Thrones, but like even down to the incest is pretty biblical. I mean,
very
there's a lot
biblical,
of magic in there.
Right?
Oh, there's dragons actually. There's also dragons in the book. Yeah, now I'm thinking about it. It's very anyway.
Right.
Maybe it's the sex scenes and stuff that.
No, it's the fact that they're not conscious of all these things in the Bible.
Yeah. So in Game of Thrones, they seem to. Well, it seemed to some people were like okay, like some people were okay being married off, but it was always like the final but seemed to stop, and this is what the vibe I get with the Bible as well. The but kind of stopped with the father. They were giving their property. Was it always the case that? I guess women were like kicking and screaming into marriage, or was it like in some instances was there like love in the marriage in the Hebrew Bible? Like, do we see that at all, or do you think it's all just property?
I just love the question because I think it's important to get at, because people will say, well, I mean, even with Hagar, people will try to defend raping Hagar because she didn't seem to mind. She seemed to be game. I'm like, really? Really? Because, I don't think she had a choice.
Could you tell that story just quickly?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Referencing Genesis chapter 16, and she also comes up in chapter 21. But Sarah and Abram are having a hard time having kids. She's 75. Go figure. Anyway, so as the narrative goes, so Sarah says, hey, it may be that we'll have a child through this enslaved woman that we purchased or were given, right, in Egypt. Go have sex with her, and any child she brings into the world will be mine and will be good. And that's a custom cultural thing, right? There's nothing new. They're not creating anything new. So rough for Abram, he goes in and has sex with her, right? And they conceive, or she conceives with him, whatever you want to say. So Hagar is property to them. She has no choice in the matter. And she's not given a voice until later. And so people will say, see, Hagar seemed to be on board with the plan to provide for Abraham's children. And, I understand reading it that way, but she didn't have a choice. What was she going to do? Right? Run away? Because that's not going to lead. That's going to be hard for her to survive. Like
well, even if she was caught, there's like punishments, like,
right.
Beat the slaves and stuff, right? Yeah.
This whole issue. And really, because people are taught to agree with the narrative and find ways to make everything that's awkward kind of work anyway, because look at the end result, that kind of a thing. So, okay, but back to your question, were there any couples that we see that there was love involved, right? I could start going down the list. And part of the problem, David, is we don't ever in the narratives see the woman's perspective. We don't, and
Mm.
you know, part of me is like, well, you can't beat people up for what they didn't do or what they left out, but I kind of can, right? The narratives are written by men for men. We're not getting to see what women's perspectives on things. Even stories about women tend to be told from a man's perspective. So we don't see when Abram and Sarah got together. We don't know what that was like, but here's where I'm coming from with it. You grow up in a culture that says we've got to marry you off when you start bleeding, right? Like we got to get rid of you, and we might even marry you off earlier, and you know, too bad for you, kind of a thing. But like you grow up in a culture that says that's your role, and that's what's going to happen with you. And if you're well trained in that, you're going to go along with it. You're not necessarily going to put up a fight. If a seed has been planted in you to say this isn't right or it's not what I want, and you get to want what you want, which is not what they're being told, right? If you've been given a little seed of autonomy, then you're going to resist, but you're not necessarily going to. Right. So we look at the story of Jacob, and he sees Rachel and apparently falls in love with her. She's beautiful. Okay. We have no idea how Rachel feels about him. No idea. We're told that, so were Rachel and Leah okay with this? Well, they worked side by side with him for 7 years. You'd think that they might be, he's familiar, at least. He's not going to harm us. I don't know, but we don't ever get to hear from a woman. We get to hear, for instance, later on, Michal is one of the women who is given to David, and that's more of a political alliance kind of a thing. But she seems to be excited about it. That's it. We don't, you know what I mean? Like, one of the things I like to say, or coming out of writing this book, is we don't ever see either testament a couple that comes together who are equals, who mutually choose it, and who marry out of love or for love. There isn't a single couple in the Bible that meets those three criteria.
Yeah, which is very different to what we have today.
It's like understatement of the year, right?
Yeah, and like even thinking back to what you said about Abraham, was it Abram at the time, or Abraham with Hagar? I don't know my Old Testament super well, but Abraham going to Hagar,
it's fine.
and same guy, different name,
yes,
right?
Right.
But going to, I can't imagine him like going into the slave quarters and being like playing with the wall and going, so what you doing? And like trying, and like, like, how about me and you go for a walk down the, and she's like, oh yes, master, I'd love to. Like, there's no
right. Seducing her into it or something. Yeah.
Yeah. He's not like trying to make, date her or something. Like, it's just, he's just like, I'll go have sex with my slave woman.
Right. We've got some business to do,
So which one of these do you think is the most obvious of these, like that makes the most sense, like that it shouldn't ever be translated as marriage? Or do you think they all shouldn't be translated as marriage? But do you think which is the one that stands out to you as like, oh, this is obviously should be translated?
Where I have come to with this is I just wish we would get rid of married language, because there's too much baggage for people today, good and bad. I don't mean that just as a totally negative thing, but there are just too many ideas that we have about marriage. Yeah, I mean, thank you. Like, I think this is a great example. Go take for yourself a promiscuous woman, or go marry a promiscuous woman, or go take for yourself a wife. It's just saying, go take a woman. Like, that's all it's saying. Go find a woman who happens to be perhaps a sex worker or whatever, in this case with Hosea. I think all of them are interesting. And that's why I tried to choose wisely what I would put in that table, because, one of my favorites is the one where men are about to go out to battle, and whoever it is, Joshua, whoever's like, hey, if you've got a woman back home that you've already purchased, you've already taken, and the English will usually say you've already married, but you haven't yet tasted the goods, go home. I think I'm blurring the line here. I think it's, if there's a young woman you've anyway, that you've taken but haven't yet married, whatever the language is. It's basically like there's a young woman back home who's waiting for you. You better go have sex with her, because if you don't, someone else is going to come along and have sex with her, and like claiming this property, like very much claiming the property. They also, it's right in the midst of, if you've built a home but you haven't like yet consecrated it or something, go home and enjoy it for a while or whatever. Like it's just
we're seeing the same kind of rhetoric with the emerged and now dying red pill movement, which is essentially, I don't know if you know this, like the online movement of like the Andrew Tates and stuff, where it's like, body count matters for women but not for men, all that kind of stuff. So that's like on the forefront of like toxic internet culture stuff at the moment, where people are talking about like, you need to find someone whose body count isn't over 3 or something.
Body count sounds like we're killing people.
yeah So it's like, that's what they'll call it. They'll say body count, and it'll be it's okay for men to sleep with like 500 people, but they can't end up sleeping dating someone who's like had more than like 2-3 partners in their life. So it's like it's this weird like they literally talk about it like it's a moral thing, like it's like you shouldn't be with someone like this,
right,
it'll never work, and all this. It's so bizarre. Right. Yeah.
There's so many issues. I mean, I remember thinking like that, and it's so interesting what it tells us about the people making those claims, right? That it will never work. Well, maybe maybe you need to do a little bit better job communicating with your sexual partner so that you can both make it work. I don't know.
Well, something you mentioned in your book as well is that adultery, right? Adultery in both testaments is not about cheating.
Yeah.
On the sacred bond. Adultery is about a man having sex with a given woman who officially belongs to another man.
That's right.
That's a quote. Can you explain what you mean there?
Yeah. Adultery in the Hebrew Bible, and then because that's the way it's defined in the Hebrew Bible, that carries over into the Newer Testament sayings by Jesus in particular. Okay. So adultery in the Hebrew Bible is about the woman's body and who gets to touch it or who gets to engage with it.
Yeah. It
is not about stepping out on a sacred vow that you've made to love each other till you die, right? Adultery was defined as a woman who belongs to another man. If some other dude comes along and has sex with her, then he is committing adultery against the other man. The woman is the object through which a man offends another man. And it counts also if she's been pledged to a man, but they haven't yet come together. So a man coming along through the woods, as you do, and has sex with her and forces himself on her or whatever, he's committing some sort of offense against the other man. It isn't about her at all. What I think is so interesting is how that idea of a woman, her body belongs to a man, and this issue of the issue of adultery. I'm getting ahead of myself and getting my ideas confused here. So let me just make sure. Have I been clear about adultery in the Hebrew Bible? I want to make sure I answer your question first, because that's not.
Yeah. Well,
mostly. Well, I think part of it is, sometimes in a classroom or whatever, I'll say, what is adultery today, right? What do we mean by adultery? We mean, right, one of the people in a committed relationship steps out in some way, right? Either emotionally or sexually, physically, right? And so in either partner can commit adultery today, if you want to use that language. And that isn't what was going on. First of all, we don't have any sense that people were making these vows to each other, right? To begin with, we just have a man taking a woman, and she's his now, and she's his baby mama, right? So adultery is all about women as property, right?
And the part that, I mean, this if I was a Christian and I was listening to this, I'd be like, no, like that's absolutely not the case. I think there's a verse in the Old Testament that paints this like so perfectly. Do you have a Bible handy, or should I read out the verse?
Oh, please. Do you have it?
Yeah, I have. I have Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
22. Do you know which verse?
Oh, yeah. That's
okay. I'm not the best reader, but
I can
if a
read
man,
it if you want me to. You want to?
yeah,
Either way. Yeah.
You read it.
I'm happy to read it.
Everyone take a big. What is everyone else drinking, by the way? Everyone take a big sip, and as we listen to Dr. Jennifer Bird read the Bible, read the rape, the rape verses of the Bible. Let's do this.
Yeah. So, which are we talking about? Deuteronomy 22, verse 13.
I think it goes 13 down to 30.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And you can pause for dramatic effect or discussing parts if you want.
There are a couple people here, or they were at least, who come to my story time, and I read biblical passages, and we talk about it through this lens. So,
cool.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So Deuteronomy 22, starting verse 13. Suppose a man marries and I always do this. My English is marry, but I know it says take in the Hebrew. Okay. Suppose a man takes a woman, but after going into her, which is so ridiculously literal, it's painful, he dislikes her and makes up charges against her, slandering her by saying, English is married, I took this woman, but when I lay with her, I did not find evidence of her virginity. And I always want to make sure people understand what the evidence of virginity is, which is bleeding on the sheets, right? And then I will save this for later. But as you know, David, I also talk about virginity as a fully just fictional construction related to female bodies. But anyway, we'll keep going. The father of the young woman and her mother shall then submit the evidence of the young woman's virginity to the elders of the city at the gate, meaning they will show the sheets that she bled on and that they kept as you do for this very reason. The father of the young woman shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter in marriage. And this is one of those things I'd want to pull apart and say, I gave this woman to this man, right? They're fully adding in marriage because the translation committee people are too uncomfortable to leave it. I gave her without saying in marriage to this man, but he dislikes her. Now he's made up charges against her saying, I did not find evidence of your daughter's virginity, but here's the evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread out the cloth before the elders of the town. The elders.
How embarrassing for the poor. Like that's
precisely.
Yeah. Oh God. Like.
Thank you. Right.
Oh, it's
so
like
ridiculous.
Not so like losing. First of all, losing your virginity is like a terrifying thing. It was for me. It was like it's scary when you first do that. But it's like then to like have literally to be the reciprocant of like things that were kind of you weren't what's the word I don't know, like you didn't you're not fully like you're just given away to be married, right? And then you go through this like you have sex, you bleed, it probably hurts, and then to have that shown throughout the town, like that's crazy. Like that's keep going.
Can I ask you a question, David?
Yeah.
Do you think it would have been so terrifying for you having sex the first time if you hadn't been told all these jacked up things about sex?
Oh, okay. Let's pivot for a second to this because we get back to the scripture, but this is big for me. So I think that sex was I guess scary because you're like, am I going to stuff up? What if they don't? All those kind of normal
performance things.
But for sure, purity culture and the way that I was taught about sex, pornography, masturbation in church built this circle of shame where I would stay up with dial-up internet looking at pornography that would load images like like this.
Dial-up porn. Oh my god! That must be awful.
And then feel guilty. Like I remember being like 12 years old and me and my friends spending literally all day on Microsoft Paint drawing a naked lady, and then printing it out. This is like
paint by numbers,
and then feeling guilty about all this, and that cycle of shame, guilt, and even like when I was taking the role of the youth pastor, the first thing I did was when I sat down with the associate pastor was, hey, I've got a problem with lust. I lust after people. And there's something I'm working on. And it was like very much like, you need to it was very much like, you need to have this kind of sorted by the time you're a youth pastor. I'm like, well, okay. And so it was
Sorted,
very,
yeah.
very kind of shame heavy. And
Yes.
when
Yes.
when my wife and I got married, we had fooled around a little bit, but we had actually, first time we had sex was on our wedding night.
Yeah.
And I was I slept with two other people like a handful of times in my teenage years. And then she was a virgin. And then when we had sex, it from then on, even now, I'll still get anxiety leading up to having sex and anxiety afterwards having sex.
I'm sorry.
About 9 times out of 10. Well, at the start, it was like 9 times out of 10. Now it's a lot better, but like it took a long time to destigmatize lust, pornography,
right,
masturbation, sex,
right.
Like, the difference between, I guess, like, not to be too crass, but fucking and making love, like that like dichotomy there.
Yeah.
That was wild. Yeah. So to answer your question in a long way possible, it was, I think that's a big part of why I'm so passionate about talking about purity culture and things like that.
You should.
And just a shout out of my future stream, I'm in talks with Linda K. Klein.
Do you? Oh, nice.
Pure, yeah. To author of Pure to come on Deep Drinks. So
nice.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the answer to your question.
Yeah, I like her work very much. She did some really important work. Thank you for saying that or sharing all that with us. I'm sure you've talked about it before, but you said it so kind of matter of factly here, and I just, as if losing one's virginity, like I would also like to do away with the concept of losing virginity. Like, sure, there's something different about us before we have sexual intimacy with another person, and then after. Like, there's a thing that's different about us, but it's not, categorically different. We just have a new experience, and a new thing has opened up perhaps within us or something like that. But go ahead.
Can I ask, if this is too personal for you, that's
Probably
fine.
not.
But okay, how did you develop in the same way, in that you found that like initially you were quite fundamentalist, right? Did you have those same kind of feelings around sex where it was shameful and things like that, or have you grown out of that? Like where do you fall? How's your idea of sex? It's something you said at the start of the book made me laugh so much, because it's how I describe myself. You called yourself, what do you say? You said, you described yourself and you said, mostly heterosexual.
Yeah.
I was that's how I describe myself, because like I'm pretty much like 99.99, but there's a few times I'm like, oh, that dude's pretty hot. Like that dude.
Right, or like I'm intrigued by that woman. Like,
yeah.
I want to ask her out, but I've never asked out a woman before. I don't dig boobs, but I think if I were bi, I'd probably really dig boobs. I'm not.
Yeah, there's just been like one or two. There's been a few occasions in my life where I'm like, what? I think the one when I was a kid, there's a removalist came around. I was like, why do I keep looking at this removalist man, like who's in the house? And I was like 13 or something, or 12. But yeah. So like, how do you feel comfortable talking about how like your ideas around sex have developed?
Sure, I do feel comfortable talking about it. I can tell you that the purity culture was not as intense when I was a teen and 20, but it was still strong because I was in an evangelical community, and the whole thing about sex and like, it's just, I remember my boyfriend at the time, like, came when we were just kissing. Clothes were still on, but we were just kissing. And it was just this most shameful moment that he actually, he ejaculated. Yeah. It was just like, we couldn't talk about it, and I had to leave that, it's like, it's just, but it was, we could do anything but, anything but penetrate, whatever. It was really strong. It was a very strong script that I adhered to. I also, what's interesting, I think, especially looking back at my own choices over the years, I was definitely up through like my mid-20s, a part of communities that had what I think of as very unhealthy sex script, right? So, it's off limits until you marry, which is just dumb, right? Because you're all of a sudden going to flip a switch and like your story, be able to do everything just fine or experiment around just fine and be comfortable when it's been off limits until now. No, it doesn't work that way for any of us on anything. So, I actually didn't have sex until I was 30, and partly because of this script, and also partly because I'm a sapiosexual. So I actually have to be turned on by you intellectually to really be interested in you. So for whatever reasons, there weren't that many opportunities for me until whatever. So I think in some ways I was kind of protected. I don't know. I don't think it was as hard for me to wait until to be until I was 30. But also I remember in seminary, this was this guy who was interested in me apparently handed me a book that it's titled Passionate Marriage, but it's not really about passion. It's about connecting, right? As a couple, and communicating and knowing your own body and knowing your own what works for you, and this whole concept, masturbation and concept of like just discovering your own body. Like it was new material for me. And I remember how freeing that was. And it also made me totally uninterested in him because I realized, anyway, that's another story. So anyway, yeah, so this shift.
When you lost your virginity at
I didn't lose my virginity.
Sorry, you didn't lose your sorry. I just corrected myself. I'll try to correct myself.
I'm messing with you. But yeah, the first time I had sex.
When you had sex, was it like oh, was that it? Like was it kind of like it's not that big of a deal? That's I know. It's like it's the biggest Yeah.
And the other thing is that when you made
it's like a fun handshake.
Well, a little bit,
yeah,
but
it's like
also,
it's not that.
Yeah. I mean, it was, and the guy, the man I was with, just lovely human and really sweet, but also like, I think he was terrified because he didn't know I hadn't had sex before. And there's some blood in the sheets, and it's like, so here's the other thing that didn't really
Did
hurt,
you take him out to the town and show the evidence?
I blamed the evidence. Yeah. So no, I think it kind of is like tripped him out that was the case. But like that whole other conversation about the evidence of a woman's virginity is actually evidence of a small form of violence being done to a woman's body. It doesn't have to happen. A woman doesn't have to bleed first time she's penetrated sexually.
But before, can I just tell
Sure.
This is a silly story, but this is kind of a naughty story. So back when Amy, I don't know if I've told this on stream, but back when Amy and I were dating, and then we weren't dating for a little while, and then we're just friends, but we would like sometimes like make out. We're both kind of like in spiraling downhill in like these bad spots in our lives, and we had kind of fooled around a little bit, but not a whole lot. And I was working at Woolworths. And I was doing night shift, and Amy was up all night, and we were texting each other, and we were texting about how fun things were, and we started to kind of like sext a little bit, and then I left work at 3 a.m, saying I was sick. I drove home. I had a shower, right, and I just moved in with this super religious lady. Like I'm renting a room from her, and she was in the front room. So I had this shower at 3 a.m. I come out, the roads are flooded. I can't get the car out of the driveway because like it's literally flooded.
Oh no!
But Amy is like, "Come pick me up and let's fool around." And it's 3 a.m, right?
And you're ready to go. Yeah.
What am I going to do? So I got the car and I drove it up the street. And in Australia, there's like footpaths sometimes between two different cul-de-sacs. And I drove up the side of the footpath and I got bogged in my Daewoo Carlos. And there's mud flicking up all like on the fence at 3 a.m. It's pouring rain. I finally got out of there. I'm like, and I go pick her up, right? I bring her back. We sneak into the house. We've got to be really quiet because we don't want to wake up this really conservative Christian lady I'm living with.
You brought her back to the place you were renting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we sneak into the room and we're kind of hooking up. And then all of a sudden I have this thought, what if I touched myself and then touched Amy and now she's pregnant? And then I was like, oh no. And then Amy started worrying about that. And then it turned to us just lying there staring at the ceiling, paranoid that we've now become pregnant. Because I hadn't come or anything. It was just like I was wondering if it's I'm lying there just like looking at the ceiling like, oh,
it has
shit.
some in it. It does have some of the goods in
so
it.
We
right?
So we get up and drive her home, and that was the end of the night. That's the end of the night, like 4 a.m, like the sun's coming up, like I'm just like by then the roads weren't flooded anymore, and I'm just like, but it was just like, and we had to hide it from her family, so she had to sneak out. It was a wild time. Yeah,
it's a good story. It's a good memory.
Okay, let's jump back into that scripture. What verse are we up to?
We can do that. Yeah. Hilarious. Okay, how do we get sidetracked? Oh, right. Evidence of her virginity, and they spread it out in front of the town. The elders of that town shall take the man and punish him. They shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, because he's lied, right? Which they shall give to the young woman's father. This is all about the men offending other men, because he has slandered a virgin of Israel, but the father still gets the money, right? Yeah. She shall remain his woman, my English says wife. She shall remain his woman. He shall not be permitted to divorce her as long as he lives. If, however, this charge is true, that evidence of the young woman's virginity was not found, then they shall bring the young woman out to the entrance of her father's house, and the men of her town shall stone her to death, because she committed a disgraceful act in Israel by prostituting herself in her father's house. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. So many things, right? I'm all of a sudden I pictured Amy in her house, and I'm like prostituting herself to you from her father's house. And of course, the female is the only one who's done a disgraceful act by already having sex. It had nothing. I mean, like it took a man also, and he's not involved in this thing at all. So that's the first story. The next situation, if a man is caught lying with the woman, my English says wife, with the woman of another man, both of them shall die. The man who lay with the woman as well as the woman. So you shall purge the evil from Israel. This is a step up actually from Exodus, because in Exodus you only kill the woman. Well, at least it's more fair here. They're both being killed,
Yeah. Huh.
Okay. Verse 23, if there is a young woman, a virgin, already engaged to be married, right, and a man meets her in the town and lies with her, you shall bring both of them to the gate of that town and stone them to death. The young woman, because she did not cry out for help in the town, and the man, because he violated his neighbor's woman, my English says wife. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. But
again, it's like it's explicitly there, because he. What does it say? Oh God! My brain.
He violated his neighbor's woman.
He violated his neighbors. It's not her. Like she's not even. He's not even. There's no concern for what she went through.
Exactly. He violated his neighbor's property. We could just change it out that way, right? Yeah. Exactly. But if the man meets the engaged woman in the open country and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. You shall do nothing to the young woman. The young woman has not committed an offense punishable by death, because this case is like that of someone who attacks and murders a neighbor. Since he found her in the open country, the engaged woman may have cried for help, but there's no one to rescue her. It's fascinating, right? And if a man meets a virgin who is not engaged and seizes her and lies with her, and they are caught in the act, the man who lay with her shall give 50 shekels of silver to the young woman's father, and she shall become his woman. My English says wife. Because he violated her, he shall not be permitted to divorce her as long as he lives. It's such a funny thing to say, right? Because I've abused you, and now you're forced to live with me the rest of your life, And then the final verse here, a man shall not take, my English says marry, a man shall not take his father's woman, English says wife, thereby violating his father's rights. Yeah. And then the next verse is about testicles being crushed and all that kind of great stuff. How you can't be admitted to the assembly of the Lord. So thus ends story time on deep drinks.
It's I think that just really sums up the property, the idea of women being property.
Yes, thank you. Yep. Yeah, and I appreciated that you said a few minutes ago, that when you identified as a Christian and if you'd heard this, you'd be like, that's not right. Yeah, I want to make sure we address those things, like right? I mean, I think this is an important passage to read, so I appreciate that, given that concern, right? One of the things about why I became a biblical scholar is there's just so much more going on in there than most people realize, right? And so I want to talk about that. I want to bring that to light. And so, I don't know if there are other questions or other points that are really helpful to kind of shed, from your perspective, to shed light on some of that, but go ahead. Yeah.
Well, what I wanted to ask is like, so this is, we've kind of gone through the Hebrew Bible, the Old or Older Testament, as we'll say, but we haven't so, and it seems like the idea of marriage or the idea of union or anything like that is kind of, it's very different to what we have today. But then we move into the New Testament, and it's also different. But there's something that I find interesting is, like, today, this is something that came to me as I was reading a book, is today marriage is a celebration. It's like seen as like the best thing that can happen in a church. It's like they're getting married this year. But the gospel, Jesus and Paul both say it's better not to marry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if, like, marriage technically, and maybe we could talk a little bit about this, about taking Paul and Jesus more seriously with what they say, if marriage should be seen as shameful in some sort of way. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, it's like, I can't resist. It's like, I ordered the double cheeseburger because I couldn't resist, like, it's, it's not, it shouldn't be celebrated. You should have got the salad, like, it's does that make sense? Because it's like, so it's like, but it's seen today as such a celebration. It's seen as like this pillar of Christianity.
Exactly.
Where Jesus and Paul explicitly say it's better not to.
They're
not saying, and then bang everyone or whatever. They're not saying, like, to be a bachelor. They're saying that because to fulfill the gospel, to fulfill the call to create disciples for ministry. Because if you have a marriage, it's holding you back from fulfilling God's purpose on earth. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I love that. I think it's also, I wanted to say, I think that's more where Paul is coming from when he says it's better not to marry, because it's just a lot of work to do this stuff that God's called us to or whatever. Paul is also anti-passion. So I know that I misread this when I was in my 20s, when I was in college. I know that I knew couples that got married because they couldn't handle it and they just really wanted to have sex. So they got married so they could have sex. And it's because of that line in 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul says, if you can't handle it, right, then get married, because it's better to marry than to burn with passion. Well, for Paul's perspective, getting married helps you put out the passion, helps you keep a lid on it. If you don't have the self-control within yourself to just squash that physical surge that's pumping through, and you're like, just put a lid on it. If you can't do that yourself, right, and turn away, dump yourself in ice water, whatever, right, then go ahead and get married, because that'll help you keep the passion under control. We always saw it as marriage is where you get to indulge and enjoy the passion. That's not what Paul's saying. He's kind of a stoic-ish kind of a thing, and he's not into passions. They're bad. So there's that. That's an important piece of Paul and that whole conversation in 1 Corinthians 7, where he keeps kind of going through all the options there. And he's like, well, for this group of people, I say you should do this, but the Lord says blah, blah, blah. And the Lord, whatever. Like, he's just making up shit on the fly, first of all. Right. And it serves a particular purpose. But he has clearly made a stance that he is either abstinent or is just choosing not. He's abstinent, right? He's choosing not to have sex, and he makes that clear. And so his standard is that, right, that you will not be engaging in sex. And in his context, that predominantly has to do with marrying or not, right? So there's that whole convoluted piece that the Word of God, as Paul is talking about putting into his letters, right? I understand why I didn't mean to make that. I didn't mean that to be dismissive. The word, I mean, right, for people who see it this way, right? If it's the Word of God, then it's got to be true. Well, actually, sometimes what's in the Bible isn't true, and it's not helpful. But many people grow up believing it is, or I certainly did for a long time, because of the way I was taught to read it. So Paul's putting these ideas out there to support a movement or an idea. I want to talk more about Jesus, though, because what was eye-opening for me was the chapter that I wrote was doing the research for the chapter on Matthew 19, 4-6. So, you know, one of the things I'm about to say is it suggests that Jesus was endorsing a bad idea. And the reason he was endorsing a bad idea is because it came straight from his scriptures. But for Christians who see Jesus as God, he can't be supporting a bad idea because he's God.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have the wrong idea in mind to be supporting. So the thing is, though, he's endorsing biblical Hebrew Bible ideas when it comes to marriage and divorce. And that's why I'm really grateful you had me read through, you had us talk about the passages that make it very clear that adultery is about a man having sex with someone else's property.
Yeah.
Because Jesus endorses that same framework, and he talks about it in light of divorce. So what's, it's really interesting. So many steps along the way for me, even as I don't remember when it happened, but there've been a lot of steps for me. In this whole process of thinking about marriage and the Bible and how people are taught to think about it versus what it's actually talking about. And one of the big ones for me came in wrestling with this separating or differentiating talking about sex and talking about marriage. Because of the way the scriptures have been translated and because of the way most Christians talk about sex as no, not until marriage, the biblical texts themselves are only talking about sex when they talk about marriage. Jesus and Paul are the only thing they talk about in relation to marriage is sex. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 that we were just referring to, and Paul's comments about whether or not you should get married or not, or remarry if you're widowed or whatever. And he's sorting out all the options. And English translation committees have made, some of them, not all of them, but have made choices to label that chapter something like advice on marriage.
Yeah.
Or blah, blah, blah. Right.
Yeah.
All Paul is talking about is whether or not you're having sex. I'm pretty sure, David, if I were to ask you, what are the top 5 things that make your marriage to Amy work? I imagine good communication and good sex, those probably in the top 5, but it's not the only thing that defines your marriage, right?
Yeah.
Sex and whether or not you choose to have it. But that's how the scriptures talk about it. The only time Paul talks about marriage is in light of sex. The only thing that Jesus is attributed with saying about marriage or divorce is in relation to sex. That neither one of them are talking about marriages in terms of communication, in terms of commitment, in terms of understanding and listening and empathy and all that great stuff. No, the only time it comes up. And so no wonder Christians have also been taught to think about predominantly sex when it comes to marriage. And this is a tangent, but it's also deeply rooted for me that people today are so hung up about the way gay men have sex, the way two women have sex, the way they are hung up on that because of this issue. The issue of marriage is about who's having sex and to what ends. And that is the Bible teaches you to think that way. The Bible teaches you to focus on the sex act in light of marriage. Yeah. If you're talking about sex, you're talking about marriage. If you're talking about marriage, you're talking about sex and whether or not, and who's having it and whether or not it can be procreative. Even Jesus in Matthew 19, can I read this passage?
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Okay.
We love Bible Hour on Bible time.
Right?
Yeah.
Story time, Bible time.
Yeah.
So one other quick thing is that the first 4 chapters of my book, Marriage in the Bible, are talking about the 4 main primary passages that people will turn to kind of help them define what they mean by a biblical marriage. So that's kind of one of the things that got me started on this book is I hear people talking about biblical marriage. What do they mean by that? Well, they usually mean, and so there are 4 passages, and it's just a total of 7 verses. But that's what chapter 1 is looking at Genesis 1:22. Okay. So, and this is pretty standard, right? In terms of different Christian communities. So these are the 4 passages. So the third passage is Matthew 19, just verses 4-6. So the passage itself starts in verse 3. Some Pharisees came to him, and to test him, they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his woman for any cause?" My English says wife, but we should also remove husband and wife from the New Testament. Okay. And what's interesting is this translation kind of hides the fact that what they're actually saying is, for which reason are you okay with divorce, Jesus? Because there's a debate between Shammai and Hillel. Already it's been well established for a couple hundred years before Jesus's time. I never knew this until I was researching. Anyway, so they're basically saying, which is the reason we get to divorce? And he answered, right, that's not how I normally heard it talked about. Have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning, quote, made them male and female, so that's reference to Genesis 1, and said, quote, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his woman, and the two shall become one flesh, end quote. Have you not heard these things? So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. And that's where the people stop, is with those 3 verses. What's interesting to me is that none of that is new. Jesus isn't making any sort of new proclamation yet. He's trotting out the conversation and the debate as it has been carried on for several hundred years. He's just letting them know, yeah, I'm familiar with this conversation. And you all want to know, you want an easy divorce? Well, I'm going to say no to divorce at all, which is one of the options in this debate, this long-held debate. It continues. They said to him, why then did Moses command us to give a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her? Again, that's not quite what Moses was doing. He's saying, if you're going to divorce her, you need to send her out this way. He said, it was because this is an issue I have, but we're so hard-hearted that Moses allowed you to divorce your women. English is what? But from the beginning, it was not so. And I say to you, and this is the Matthean Jesus ratcheting things up. And this is where it gets interesting. Whoever divorces his woman, except for unchastity, and takes another, commits adultery. Okay, what he has just said is marriage is all about claiming another body, a man claiming a woman's body. He has just acknowledged the Hebrew Bible version of marriage, which is a man has sex with a woman and she's his. If you two separate, you're both going to go have sex again, and you're going to be committing adultery on that first pairing. The language, the commitment, the underlying assumptions about people and relationships are all focused on sex. It is not about what is true, which is divorcing can be hard for lots of reasons, right? You've made bonds. You've connected to their families, both of you, right? You have a support system. You've pooled goods together, however you want to look at it, right? You have networks together, and it is hard and painful. And if you have children, that can be difficult. Like, there are a lot of things involved that make a divorce hard, if it is. But everybody from a Christian tradition has been taught to focus on this idea that sex, right, is a way that that you belong to another human because you've had sex with them. It's just awful. But I believed it. And it took me a very long time to even consider talking about marriage and sex separately, to be able to talk about sex without talking about marriage, right? That took a while for me to unfold, like deconstruct, pull apart. I've stood in front of undergraduates and realized I wasn't going to be able to communicate this to them, that they were coming from such a Christian influenced position on no sex before marriage, that for me to talk about sex at all in any kind of positive way, for them, that meant marriage. And I was trying to get them to pull those apart. But that's how the Hebrew Bible teaches us to think. It's how Jesus's words suggest that we think. That the problem with divorcing is you're going to go have sex with someone else. And we know that that would be a form of adultery against that first bond, which is so detrimental, in my opinion. And people defend this idea because it's what Jesus has said. Well, I am sorry. I'm sorry. And that's why it makes it hard to point out. It's like Jesus himself is endorsing that women are property.
Yeah, that's a tough. That would be a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. But the same thing with you were on the slavery panel. The same thing with slavery. In Jesus' mind, slavery is the same. You know, so you own another human. You can beat them. They're property. You can pass them on to your children like that. He doesn't reform any of that.
He doesn't. He uses those enslaved people as an example. Oh yeah, all kinds of unfortunate stuff, right? If I can say, and I don't know if you want to go somewhere a different direction with this, but also, and this is what I talk about in the book, which this part so far was really important for me to wrap my head around at some point, but then to be able to find a way to invite other people to see that. I don't know if I succeeded in the book. I hope I did, or even if I just planted some seeds about it, that Jesus is representing what the Hebrew Bible says here about marriage and why divorce is a problem. And it's all focused on sex. And I think that's a thing that I really wish people would reconsider. They believe it and think about it that way for a good reason. Their entire scripture, all of it teaches them to think about marriage through the light of sex. And when sex is involved, it needs to be proper, and a man, anyway. So, but then the next, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, go.
Well, the next three verses for me and the research that I stumbled across were mind-blowing. Do we want to go there?
Yeah.
The next few verses from Jesus. His disciples said, in light of this whole thing about like, whoever divorces his woman except for unchastity and marries not, whoever remarries basically is committing adultery. And the disciples are like, okay, if such is the case of a man with his woman, it's better not to marry to begin with. And this is back to your point that where we started here. And Jesus said, yeah, pretty much. Right. And there is another place where he actually directly says it is better not to marry. But this is hinting at that. And what he says is not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it is given. And then he lays out the whole eunuch scenario, right? So eunuchs, so I'm going to read it and then we'll talk about eunuchs. For there are eunuchs who've been from birth, born without testicles. And there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can. And I remember suggesting there be a Matthew 19 tent at Promise Keepers. Do you know what Promise Keepers are here in the United States? It's where Christian men come together to support each other.
Oh, okay. The name rings a bell, but
it's a very conservative, evangelical kind of, like Promise Keepers. We're gonna keep our promises, vows, and all the, And I'm like, and you're all gonna castrate yourself for the kingdom if you can handle it, right? Like, I actually asked a man who was bugging me on Twitter one time. I was like, so are you and your buddies gonna castrate yourselves, given Matthew, Jesus? And he didn't like that very much. I'm like, well, yeah. Guess what, folks? Okay, not only is he saying that any man who can handle it should castrate himself, remove his own testicles, right? So that there goes having children. There goes procreation. What? Go ahead. What?
I must have read that and heard that, but I didn't absorb it. Wait.
Yes, exactly. That's what everybody does. They just ignore it.
Wait, it's like my brain just couldn't process. Like,
this is great that this is live recorded.
Wait, so read that and get what? Hang on, read that in context again, please. Because what?
Yes.
Hang on.
Yes. Matthew 19, verse 11 and 12.
So,
yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Not all can accept this, but only those whom that is granted. Some are incapable of marrying because they...
Oh, that's my favorite! Some are incapable of marrying. No! Oh my gosh. Just because a man doesn't have testicles does not mean he cannot marry.
Ooh.
That comes from the 4th century, where the bishops are uncomfortable with this issue. And men have been castrating themselves for the sake of the kingdom for 300 years. And it's becoming an issue. So they
And there are those who choose to live like eunuchs. But well, hang on. Okay, this is the live like. This is the NIV translation. Live like eunuchs. So is it like as if they,
so
or is
here's
it saying?
yes, no, this is all I would say Christian bias about sex. That if you don't have testicles, you're not having sex. Well, first of all, some men without can still get an erection, or at least for a little bit.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Sex is more than just penis and vagina. Are we?
Yes? Yeah.
So there's that. So the fact that we're talking about sex as only one form, right? No, actually, and this was the part that just blew my mind. Okay, in the first century, when this is being written, right? Whether or not Jesus said, I don't care, but let's just pretend that he actually said these words because they're being attributed to him, and that's what matters to people in communities of faith, right? It's attributed to Jesus, so let's take it seriously. In the first century, eunuchs, for better or worse, deserved or not, had a general reputation for being actually quite promiscuous because it was guaranteed prophylactic. Women, over the centuries, women of especially higher class women preferred to have sex with castrated men because it was they weren't going to get pregnant. And men and eunuchs, so castrated men, they were known to be quite good sexually, intimately, with men and women. So in the first century, we have a group of people referred to as eunuchs who culturally, socially are thought of as not male or female because of the loss of their air quotes manhood. So we've got non-binary people who are sexually promiscuous. And Jesus, yeah, exactly.
Conservative Christians have left the chat.
I know, because but it's true. Like, I'm not making it up. It's like we see all these references in philosophical statements about the way they're talked about as this third gender. I'm not making it up just because it sounds similar to today. It's not. They're male, but they're not. They kind of act like a female. Especially if they're neutered early or before puberty, right? Like, they're not really one or the other. They're kind of this in between or okay. And the fact that they had a reputation for being sexually active is what makes me angry and blows me. It's all the things come together because Jesus is referring to people who are the outcast of the outcast, right? And there's a reason in the first century why he might have put them up on some form of a pedestal and talking about the kingdom of God. But very early on in church history, the men in the church got very uncomfortable and turned it into something else. They decided to take the reference to a eunuch, which people would know are sexually promiscuous people, or at least in terms of their reputation, and they turn it into not marrying. That has nothing to do with whether or not you're married. Eunuchs could be married. Like, that's not a thing. But the tradition, the men within the tradition were so uncomfortable with it, they turned it into being celibate, not getting married. And that is not what it meant when Jesus said it.
Okay, this is so
exactly.
So I really want to, because this is going to be like a fun thing to bring up in Twitter arguments, which I'm trying to get better at, people. But it's so hard. I got to get off that platform. It makes me so toxic.
Yeah, I left it a while ago. Yep.
Yeah, it's just
we make our choices. You do you. Yeah.
Yeah. So it says to live like eunuchs. Like, the word like there, if I was a fundamentalist Christian, I would say, like, well, no, it's just saying not to have sex, not to. Is that translation there correct, to live like eunuchs, or is it saying?
I don't think it is, but what I will do is, if you can give me a second, I can pull it up in the my computer will move slowly here for a second, but
this is so annoying, by the way. I have a Strong's concordance. And then I'm told, no, that sucks. So then I get an interlinear, and they're like, like the further I dig into it, it's like, no, you need this special application that has like and I'm like, oh my, like, it's like this it actually is a lot harder than you think. It's not like you have like a perfect parchment and you go, this Greek word means this, like this, so.
No, it's true. It is complicated.
Yeah.
You're right. Let me see. Let me get rid of that one. So I don't have my Greek handy, I don't think. Oh, wait. Yes, I do.
Which verse 12 for their verse 12, Matthew 19 verse 12, for there are eunuchs who are born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven.
That's interesting. That's fascinating. Okay, so the NRSV says there are. Well, the NRSV says there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. And let's see what it says in the Greek. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Yeah, that's what it says in the Greek.
So they're being sneaky.
Totally. All the time. No, all the time.
Whoa.
There are so many ways the translation committee people have been sneaky that we're not aware of unless we start looking at things like this. Right?
Damn.
When you see 1 Corinthians 7 and the heading says advice on marriage, what are you thinking? Like, what are you going to do as soon as you start reading?
Like,
you're thinking of
this is
about marriage. I'm going to read this through the lens of this is about marriage. Of course, that was such an innocent, but not really shift, right?
Yeah.
That's not really about marriage. This is about sex and whether or not Paul wants people having it, basically.
Paul is a bit of a buzzkill, isn't he?
He's a bit of a control freak. Yeah. He's a bit of a narcissistic control freak.
Just to quickly wrap up, because we said we weren't going to go over 90 minutes. And I remember when I was talking to, I was part of a church, the Bible was kind of secondary to whatever the Holy Spirit, like we'd always go back to the Bible, but like people figured out things from the Holy Spirit and through God. And I remember talking to someone, a male kind of leader, asking them, we're kind of just talking about sex, and we're talking about what purity is, and like, can you just do anything after sex? Like, can you dress up like a police officer or a nurse? Can
when you're married, is it
all
up? Is it all legal?
Kind of stuff. Yeah, is it all legal? And we I don't know how. We got on the subject of like, no, that's not okay because you're lusting over someone else. And they said specifically that like anal sex, butt stuff was essentially not okay. And I was like, well, okay. And they referenced the scriptures on sodomy, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I said,
oh,
so
wow.
Yeah, they referenced scriptures on sodomy, and I said, okay, so, and then I asked, and then we talked about oral sex later. And they said, yeah, oral sex is fine. And they said to me, you'll know, like the Holy Spirit will tell you what's okay and what's not okay. And you'll know, like if you ever wanted to do, kinky sex or butt stuff or whatever, you'll know whether or not it's okay, right? And then I went away and I was like, well, that's interesting. Like, let's look at these verses. And then I find out that sodomy refers to oral sex as well. And I was like, wait a minute, the Holy Spirit told him that oral sex is okay, and that butt stuff is not okay. Like, and I'm like, this is crazy. I was like, is the Holy Spirit lying to him? Like, this is, and this goes right back to what you're saying about like the sex acts is what becomes important. And this goes right back to, talking about, different non-traditional forms of sex. But we're talking about homosexuality, homosexual marriage and things like that. And can you just, you kind of wrap up the Bible with not the Bible, you wrap up your book with the only heteros chapter. Could you give a brief explanation about what you cover there?
Are you sure you want me to?
Yeah, go for it. And just before we do that, make sure you go get the book. The book is incredibly easy to read. It's incredibly insightful. Could you post the code again?
I can.
You will get a discount if you use this code.
Yep.
And it's pinned up the top, and I'll make sure that I'll star this so it's at the end of the episode. But here we go. But that's the code. Use that, and you'll get a discount on the book. But definitely check that. Definitely pre-order.
Thank you.
And then let Dr. Jennifer know that you have bought it wherever you on your Instagram.
That's fun. Yeah, that's really fun if people do that.
YouTube.
if you want to go a little bit over 90 so we can do some questions, we can do that too. I just want, I'm doing okay mentally.
Okay.
It's been a long day, but I could do that if you want. But you know, you and I were talking about this before, and I there's this part of me that the Only Heteros chapter was another one that was fun for me, and also developed over multiple years because it took me a couple steps. Like I had to take in some of the content of the Only Heteros chapter one bite at a time. I mean, right? I mean, I went to seminary and then 6 years of graduate school after seminary, and it's still like some of these ideas that I'm putting in chapter 10 for people to hear or read all at once took me, right? I'd been focused my life on this, and I still had to take it one bite at a time before I could like, right? You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, I feel like that's exactly why it does need to be out there. Like it shouldn't have been foreign to me what's in this chapter. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it shouldn't have been something that people had been directing me not to see. That when we look at the language of the letter of Philemon, for instance, there's a lot going on in that letter, rhetorically speaking, that's just between the lines. Paul is, I mean, I don't know how to say this without just saying it, but like I've had students who did not grow up in a church read the letter of Philemon, and this is a letter that's written from Paul to a guy named Philemon and about his runaway slave. So Philemon's runaway slave came to find Paul. They had a thing going on, whatever that was. Paul sends a runaway slave back to his master. This is one of those things where, just not clear about how that goes down for Onesimus, the enslaved person. But also the language in the letter is such that Paul is like a domineering lover to Philemon. And Onesimus maybe steps in the gap between the two of them. He's going to come visit him soon. I've had students straight up not asking. I was not looking for it. And they'd say, why does Paul have an issue with homosexuality in Romans chapter 1 if he wrote this letter? Like it was so obvious to them that there's something going on very intimate between Philemon and Paul, that this was a letter that Paul did not want discovered. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't say that because I need that to be the case. I say that because that's what the rhetoric says. The rhetoric, if you're paying attention, he's playing with ideas. There's, in the first set, in Paul's context, enslaved peoples, just like they have been ever since, and just like they were prior to that, enslaved peoples were used for sex. That was one of the things about enslaved peoples, male or female, is you knew that you might be a receptacle for your master. So Paul is talking about this runaway slave playing with the runaway slave's own name, which is useful. And what is the primary thing they're useful for? Labor. Secondary, sex. Like that's a given in the first century. It made me so uncomfortable the first time I had to encounter this idea. I didn't want it to be true. That's Paul using a person and like talking about that. And it's like, oh my gosh, having sex with a man. And what do I do with that? I don't know what to do with that. Blah, blah, blah.
Wait, is that like, was Paul the thorn in the side guy?
Yeah. Yeah,
is that maybe the thorn in his side
that he had those longings and he thought it was wrong? Yeah. Wait, I missed. Did you just say a joke that I missed? I don't know.
Oh, I don't know, but it's funny. It's always the isn't it always the homophobic person ends up having like secret.
Precisely.
A little love affair.
Of course, because in particular because the scriptures do teach people to be homophobic, right? We can explain away, this is way off topic on this one, but we can explain away if we want to some of the, like Leviticus 18:22. Yeah, I can talk about that in terms of they need to procreate, yada, yada. But there's still a film of homophobia on those two verses, Leviticus 18:22 and Leviticus 20:13. There's still some homophobia in there because of all these issues of people not knowing what to do about sex and bodies and not having this understanding of this is just a normal thing and it's not contagious and all that kind of stuff, right? So Paul is going to grow up thinking that way of people and of himself. So of course he's going to internalize a hatred for that thing, even if it is a part of himself.
Mm.
Did that make
Interesting.
sense? Or are you
Yeah, it did.
okay?
So let's say, the first person I ever interviewed on this on Deep Drinks was my friend, closeted homosexual, 45 years,
Oh my gosh, poor
and
guy.
yeah, and now he's in a long-term relationship,
Great.
and he's
Happy.
out and he's happy.
Yeah.
He's still a Christian,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
but so maybe just someone who is a Christian. They've grown up thinking that it's always been wrong. They're attracted to people of the same sex. Like, what do you say to someone like that? Are you the kind of person who will say homosexuality is fine, do whatever you want, or are you the kind of person that says, from a Christian perspective, a moral thing, or you're the kind of person that says these are way more complicated than you think, and like, what advice would you give to someone like that?
I do think that I am fully supportive of people and their sexualities, whatever they may be. Obviously, I don't think of situations where you are in a position of power over someone else is appropriate, and and I'm also just going to say, and that would include an animal. So when people start to like throw bestiality into the same mix as homosexuality and bisexuality, like it unnerves me, because I'm like, are you kidding me? Like,
yeah.
So I just want to throw that out there.
That just made me realize that comes from the Bible. Hey, because it
it's
lumps
the next
them all
verse.
in.
Yep, it's right after.
Oh, that's why.
Yeah, that's why.
I wonder if that wasn't the next verse, I wonder if there would be such a hatred for it. Like, that is so whoa. That's what. Again, keep going.
Yeah, right. So I'm very sex positive. Okay. I think we should talk about it more. I think we should talk about, I have some friends who are doing just some very honest sex education for youth groups and things like that. Kara Haug, Haug, is doing it. Person I'm thinking of, a couple others as well. But like, we're not given, at least my experiences growing up and that of many people in it, we're not given a chance to just be honest about our bodily desires and functions and yearnings. And so all of the pieces about, lusting after someone, first of all, as if you have control over that. Okay, you can decide what to do with that, but that's a thing that happens. Like, that's just human bodies. Can we stop shaming human realities, please? So whatever the attraction is, right? I'm going to say for other humans, but like, like, that's just how you're wired. And I don't think that that's a thing to be ashamed of. I don't think that's a thing to, you know what I mean? And I think that's just I think there's a piece there where we just need to stop putting things in categories and limiting things and talking about this and that, and the language of allowing is just driving me crazy, So
that's what I really
pieces.
like about how you say mostly heterosexual, because I think that's because, and Dr. Sherrill said homosexuality is only one on the spectrum of human sexuality, and that's so true. Right. It's like something I've heard recently is humans are going to human, and like humans are complicated, and you have this humans wrote the Bible, and it was a very specific perspective in every single verse and every single book. So it's I'm not a Christian, but if someone wanted to remain a Christian and look at these verses, I would just say that it's not something. This is advice I always give. Like, don't try and enjoy your life, because there was a time where myself now would be the worst nightmare for my Christian self, and going back to my Christian self would be the worst nightmare I have now. So I'm just trying and enjoy your life where it's at. Don't take things too seriously. The world is not going to fall apart.
And I think at least the biblical scholar in me wants to say there are some ancient ideas in this book called the Bible, and I think we need to be able to call out the ones that we know better than today. And I know that scares some people, just what I've said, as if, like, she knows better than God or whatever. I'm like, all right, Ken, let me just take a chill pill. You're like, yeah. So we've got some ancient ideas about relationships. We've been talking about it for an hour and a half, right? Women are property, like all this stuff. There's no, so yeah, I agree with you on the enjoy yourself, but I also I really want people to be able to think beyond, to not have to abide by what the Bible says when it comes to sex.
Permission Granted, which is, people should go read your other book as well.
Yeah,
it's on
thanks.
Audible. Are you gonna do an Audible version of this one?
I am. I hope very soon.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. I'll have to re-listen to it when that comes out. Well, let's so we're gonna go over 2 months. I've got a super chat from Jason Rollins, who's actually one of the archbishops on the Patreon, Deep Tricks Patreon. But he sent a $5 super chat saying, does Dr. Bird have an opinion on why we translate Eve's name as Eve? Name translations seem arbitrary to me. Yeshua, Jesus, Jacob, James. And I think they're like an hour behind. So because they commented and said, sorry, I'm like an hour behind. So
yeah, it's all good.
Curveball, yeah.
Yeah, that's fun. Well, I mean, we could take the Jacob James is a little bit more than Heva to Eve. So Eve's name is Heva. I could actually go look it up again just to make sure, but it's actually a fairly close transliteration. That's I'm not trying to be picky here, but that is what we call it when we try to take from one language and transliterate. We take the sound here in this letter and put it into the letter that we would use for that sound, right? So that's what we've done with like Jacob in the Hebrew Bible, which ends up is Yaakov, right? And so we transliterate that. What is Yah? We don't have, so we've either a Y or a J because of the German influence, actually, and all these things going on. So Jacob in the Hebrew Bible is Yaakov. That's pretty similar, right? Avram is the original name of Abraham. So Abram, that's pretty close transliteration. So Eve is the same. I would want to look it up in the Hebrew Bible just to make sure, but my sense is it's Heva. Mm-hmm.
Do you read Greek, yeah? Or do you not read Greek?
I can read it and translate some. I mean, I'm not as good as I used to be as a graduate student, but Greek and Hebrew, and I took Aramaic as well.
Is it hard to learn? Which was the hardest out of those three?
I loved Hebrew. It is a beautiful language, the biblical Hebrew.
Yeah.
I don't know why I found it so beautiful. And I wish I enjoyed it more than Greek, but Greek is very systematic. I studied Latin in middle school, so Latin and Greek are kind of interesting to me. I like languages, so it was fun for me to do both.
Yeah. Yeah. I went to go learn Greek and I was like, maybe I should go learn French first, because I was 100 days into that on Duolingo or something. So I went back to learning French, and then that got really frustrating after a while. So,
no, I would say German or Latin. Latin and Greek are a lot.
Well, the thing is, it's so annoying because I chose French because I wanted what language? I want to learn a different language, and I chose French because Jules Verne. I was like Jules Verne. His novels are written in, and I was like, cool. But now I'm like way more into the biblical stuff, and I was like, oh man, and my family, they're all learning German. I'm like, this is annoying. And one of my favorite bands is Rammstein, a heavy metal band. And I was like, I could have learned. I was like, why not choose German? Anyway, one day I might choose another language. But we have another super chat from I Killed Earl. Thank you so much for the $5 super chat. I took a vow of celibacy. I'm officially a nun of the Satanic Temple.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'd be interested to learn more about that.
I know. I feel like asking you all kinds of questions, but and it is interesting to me how sex and the choosing not, and this isn't about you, Earl, IKE, but it is interesting how over the centuries, right, this idea of celibacy is linked for a lot of people to an ability, perhaps. Oh my gosh, I thought you were being serious. Oh my God, that's hilarious. Did you want to put her comment? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a joke.
Do you know this person and they're regular?
They're lovely. They're always here.
Okay, nice.
Nice.
You could have warned me, David. I thought she was serious.
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
You never know.
I haven't,
people surprise you.
Caught up with her in like real life or anything, but yeah, I see her all the time. It's just fantastic. We actually have just as we're ending, we have all the we have like Dr. Kip comes here. Did someone say Rammstein? Mid-Vision podcast. Dr. Bird, one of my favorite people.
Thanks,
that's
dear.
so good.
Yeah.
Is that an offensive emoji, the bird there, or is that funny? Or is that?
I think it's funny. Yeah. I am not easily offended, especially not by a friend. Like if a friend says something that's like crass or whatever, I'm just gonna roll with it because life is too short. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fantastic. We need to get you on again. I mean, but you don't need to wait for your next book to come out. There's so much. I've got pages, more notes that we could have gone through, but we'll have to do this another time. But thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer Bird, for coming out. Guys, make sure you check out a book. It's fantastic. You also have a YouTube channel and a website, Instagram. Links are in the description. Make sure you check it out. And let me just quickly star. Remember, that's the code. Use that code. You get a discount. Oh, we have another super chat. Okay, the last super chat.
Yep.
Thanks, Hang for She, $20 coming in with a super chat.
Mm-hmm.
Can we ever have equity/justice when so many of our stories literally crush women? For example, Eve had zero agency, and she didn't choose Adam, and then she gets whacked by Yahweh in his trap. How do we ever this effect moving to go forward?
Yeah.
It's the same with I've heard a lot of. I mean, it's a very atheist tip fedora point, but it's like it's the idea of was it the Holy Spirit didn't get consent with Mary, and that's like
Luke, yeah,
blasphemous things like. But that's a point that a lot of people bring up. Like, so what do you think about this comment?
Oh no, I mean, I'm right there with you. What do we do? Right? So many of these stories are meeting a patriarchal narratives agenda. There's no question in my mind about that. I'm right there with you. Right? And that's why I do what I do, which is I try to highlight over and over the problematic elements of these scriptures. I've spent enough of my life trying to be nice about it, and even trying to convert people into trying to take a particular stance on this. But I'm an educator. And so I'm doing a live stream. I do it twice a week. I read passages, and we talk about the problem through this lens of sex and marriage and physical, intimate engagements that involve physical harm. So right there with you on your question, I think that's actually part of why we're struggling to address these elements within our culture still. Like we are still, I mean, there's not a global Me Too movement in the 21st century unless you have very deeply rooted stories and ideas that are teaching you unconsciously to think about men and women in these really unhelpful ways for either group, right? And so we're teaching people to think this way and growing up this blah, blah, blah. I also, so I think that's one of the reasons I'm a biblical scholar, is to highlight these things and say, let's talk about this. Let's think about this. You do not have to continue to perpetuate this way of thinking, but let's be honest about the fact that it is going to affect your way of thinking, right? The other thing I want to point out, which is this, I actually think Eve has a bit more autonomy than you do, and that's okay that we disagree on that. I kind of like it.
I haven't even thought about it. I just know.
No. I'm not you. I meant Hang Fish. Yeah, Hang.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. We think differently, and that's great. I would invite you to go read chapters 2 and 3 in my book, Permission Granted, because Hang Fish. Yeah, right. She does get whacked for falling into the trap. But the thing is, I had a rabbi suggest that we look at Genesis chapter 3 as a step up for humankind, not a fall. This is a thing that separates humans from other animals, is our conscience. It's a pain in the ass at times because it has you up at night worrying about something sometimes, right? Like a moral issue or ethical issue. So it's not always great, but it's actually a good thing. It is actually what allows us to have civilization. If there is such a thing as, can we actually call it civilization? That's another question. But my point is, you don't actually I think there's an interesting or more interesting way of reading that story than the way Christians have been taught to read it, which is to see that as a naughty disobedience, and I got you, and I told you not to do, and you did, so I'm going to say nah. Yeah, I actually think Eve is pretty strong and powerful, and she's curious. Damn it, she's curious. I like that. The woman saw that it was good food to help you with wisdom, and she had some. Yes. That's my girl, right? So there's more than one way to look at Eve. That's my point.
I love to be a misogynist as a joke to my wife all the time.
Okay.
It's totally as a joke, but what I'll do is I'll go if she's having period cramps or something, and I'm like, well, you shouldn't have eaten the fruit, and she gets so enraged. it's hilarious. She goes like, "You don't believe that?" I'm like, but anyway, it's fun. It's fun.
It's fun.
That's actually what Paul should have written about. Is most of marriage is just annoying the other partner. Like
Right.
another thing I'm going to try and do is my wife's very particular about how the house is. Just this is a good one for anyone. Just get the teaspoons and just turn them around. Just turn them around in the thing so they're facing the other way in the drawer. Just something like that. They'll just just move.
Just to fuck with her.
Move,
Mhm.
yeah, just move where the bowls are. Like
Great idea.
just throws them out. It's great. It's something to do. It keeps marriages interesting.
Interesting.
I did actually hear. I heard of this. This is an Australian thing that's called power moves. Where Hamish and Andy do it, and this one person, what he would do is when his wife wasn't talking to him, he would go and tighten all the jars and and turn off all the toilet, turn off the toilet. So eventually she would have to come and say, like, need help. It's like, oh, I can help you, sure. Like, it's just it's a joke.
Passive aggressive, yeah, a little.
Yeah. But anyway, well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you, everyone, for the super chats. And let me just quickly shout out your YouTube channel because you mentioned it.
Oh, thank you.
Your live streams are here. You can go check them out.
Yeah.
Hang out Dr. Jen whenever you want.
Thank you. It's been
Cool.
fun to be here. Thank you for that. I appreciate that little plug in my YouTube channel. Thank you.
Well, links are in the description. Thanks, guys, for coming out, and I appreciate it. Thanks, Dr. Jen, for coming on.
Thank you.
Bye.